Welcome to the Port Townsend Marine Science Center's lecture series, The Future of Oceans. This is our last lecture for our 10th season of the series, and we are so happy to have you all here today. I'd also like to acknowledge that at the Marine Science Center, we work on the traditional lands and waters of many Coast Salish peoples, particularly the Sklallam people, the Strong people. We respect and are grateful for this land, these waters, and the people who have inhabited them since time immemorial, and who continue to steward this place for future generations. I'd also like to acknowledge our donors, the Darrow family, who I can't see. I don't even know where they are, for supporting this series every year. They want to make it possible for everybody to come and be part of some type of lifetime learning that maybe they wouldn't be able to come to if there was a big ticket price for it. So we really appreciate their support. I think that they actually have an idea of lifelong learning as being lifelong, life wide, life deep. And so thank you to the Darrows, wherever you are. And last, I want to say a thank you to Centrum. Centrum made it possible for us to use this venue today when we knew that the chapel would be too small in the middle of everything going on at the state park. Centrum really was so gracious about making sure we had this venue, and also they've just been amazing supporters of us. They are not just a world-class arts organization, but they are really wonderful colleagues to have on the campus, and I especially want to thank Michael and Austin for tech support and moral support all this year. Okay, I'm almost there. Our format is the same as always. We'll have our wonderful lecturer. We'll take time for questions at the end. And then I have a favor. At the end, we need to get Peter Harrison from here on the stage out to the front of the house so that he can sign and sell books and that you can say hi to him. And so if we can kind of coordinate that effort to make it possible for him to get from here to there at the end without, too much dilly-dallying, that would be great. So, thank you. So, I'm pretty sure the reason that all of you are in this room is that you already know quite a bit about Peter Harrison, and he doesn't need a lot of introduction, but I do have a page. So, I'll be quick. Peter Harrison is a world-renowned conservationist, artist, author of more than a dozen books. His first book was published in 1983, and it's probably a book that a lot of you own, Seabirds, an identification guide, which was considered the Bible, best bird book of the year, when it was published for the last 40 years. And I know that people cling to their copies of that book that they have marked and used for all this time, and all those earlier editions. But in 2021, he published SEABIRDS, the new identification guide, a comprehensive guide to the 434 seabirds around the world, which is the culmination of a lifetime of dedication to seabirding. And he has copies of the book here today. The highlights of his career are so many, but I love that in 2011, on an expedition to Chile, he led a group of 5 to really discover and describe the first new storm petrel species in 100 years, the Pincoya storm petrel, and it's been cited and all of that has been written up so many times. It's really fun to see the research follow through since 2011. He serves on the board of directors for the Friends of South Georgia Island and is very proud of his efforts contributing to the South Georgia Habitat Restoration Project, which is the largest successful rodent eradication project ever attempted. In 2023, Peter was, I know, you'll have to just keep applauding like the whole time, so. Peter was selected by BirdLife South Africa as the first patron for the Mouse-Free Marion Project to help conserve the albatross and petrels of Marion Island. I know I'm talking fast. In recognition of global conservation efforts throughout his lifetime, Peter received a member of the Order of the British Empire from Queen Elizabeth II, and that was followed by a very prestigious conservation gold medal from the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. In 2017, he was awarded the New York Linnaean Society's Eisenmann Medal for Excellence in Ornithology. And in 2022, on the 100th anniversary of BirdLife International, Peter received one of BirdLife's highest honors for his contributions to the knowledge and conservation of seabirds. Peter is a fellow of the Explorers Club and co-founded the global travel company Apex Expeditions. He continues to lead expeditions to the Arctic and the Antarctic, but fortunately he spends some time around here, so we get to see him. His life's work has been really driven by this deep understanding that the health of the seabird population is intimately tied to the health of our oceans. And he reminds us that species extinction is not an imperative, that it is a reality if we fail to care for the oceans, but we can do something about that. I also just want to mention that Peter Harrison and his wife, Shirley Metz, who's probably out in the lobby, are longtime supporters of the Marine Science Center. And Peter offered to do this talk for us today as a way to kind of provide tangible support for the conservation and educational outreach work that the Marine Science Center does, and we're very grateful to him for that. We're also really grateful that they're part of this community, and with you all, we feel like there's just hope for the future, hope for a world where people and wildlife and wild places can not just coexist, but thrive. So without any more yapping on my part, please welcome Peter Harrison.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I would just add that Shirley, my wife, and myself, we have lived in the Port Townsend area at Port Hadlock, overlooking Oak Bay, for 36 years. And we came here. Shirley flew in from America, from Australia, from where she was giving a lecture. I flew in from the Antarctic, because I go to the Antarctic a lot. I've done over 200 trips to the Antarctic. And we had 2 days to find a home. That's the sort of speed that we normally move at. And she had a friend in the real estate business out at Port Angeles. We spent a day looking around Port Angeles. With all due respect to those of you that might live there, let me just say that it wasn't quite our thing. And at the end of the first day, the real estate agent turned to us and said, "Well, I know what you don't like." He said, "I've spent a day with you," and he said, "The only place I think you'll ever fit in is Port Townsend." And I said, "Why is that?" He said, "There's a load of hippies and 60 dropouts." And here we are in Port Townsend. When I was asked or volunteered to give a lecture here this afternoon, I thought only a few minutes before I came up with Ocean Nomads. And Ocean Nomads, of course, can be entitled as well, the albatrosses of the world. The open ocean is to birds what space is to mankind. It's the last great frontier. For most birds, it poses the harshest, the most unyielding environment on the face of the planet. And that environment, for most birds, is the most challenging area of the world that they can live in or over. But for many of you that are travelers, you'll know that you can be 100 miles, you can be sometimes 1,000 miles out to sea, and yet you can still go to the rails of a ship, look seawards, and see a bird. But these aren't ordinary birds. These are not sparrows, robins, hawks, falcons. These are seabirds. And of the world's 430 or so seabird species, there is one group that stands out as something significant. One group that should grab hold of those heartstrings of yours and fill you with a sense of awe, a sense of wonderment. And for me, those birds are the albatrosses. The albatrosses should tug at those heartstrings and fill you with enchantment and even a sense of disbelief. What I'd like to do here in this afternoon's little talk is to share with each and every one of you some of my own albatross experiences gained over the last 60 or so years. And it would be my hope to instill in all of you something of the wonderment that I always feel when I'm working with albatrosses. In reality, these aren't just birds. These are the monarchs of the bird world. Just about everything that you'd say about an albatross is straight from the Guinness Book of Avian Records. These birds are the largest flying birds in the world. Did you all see the banner out there as you came in? That banner is 11 feet 2 across wingspan. That's the wingspan of the actual bird. So as you go out, get a photograph of yourself standing under those wings of that albatross. We put that together especially for you and especially for some of the younger members of our group we knew that we would have here tonight. So these birds, 11.5 feet across on some occasions. They live the longest of any birds, and they also fly further than any of the other birds. Average would be 500 to 600 miles in a single day. So these are the albatrosses. Very, very wonderful birds. Their kingdom is not one of hillsides, meadows, or castles, but rather the open ocean, an ocean that is always changing, sometimes rough and serene, sometimes rough and windswept, at other times calm and serene. It is over these ever-changing landscapes or seascapes that the albatrosses eke out their itinerant, often precarious life forms. So come with me there to that world of the albatrosses. Let's start asking ourselves some questions. How many species of albatross are there? Where do they live? How long do they live? How long do they mate with each other? And what is their life expectancy? These things should concern us all. In terms of the albatrosses, let's first look at the name albatross. You know, the Brits conquered the waves. We weren't the first nation to do so. Before us were the Dutch and the Spanish and the Portuguese. And there are many words in the English language that we've taken and we've bastardized into English. Alcatraz you will have all heard of. And Alcatraz was the start of the word albatross. Any large seabird was normally labeled simply as an alcatraz. And from there, we had a person, John Fryer, who was rounding the Cape of Good Hope down in southern Africa one year, and he looked behind, and for day after day, there was one bird that had a peculiar feather missing on its right wing. And he talks eloquently about this bird, this one single albatross that followed his boat for not 1 day, not 2 days, not 3 days, but 4 days. And all he talked about was this enchanting bird, this huge bird that was the size of 2 men standing on top of each other and black and white and flew without a single beat of their wing. And that was in 1672. John Fryer was the first person that used albatross, and that had undergone a change from Alcatraz to albatross and then eventually to albatross. I was young once. This is a photograph that was taken down at Cape Horn when I was 42 years old, so around about 1983, just after my first book had been published. And in those days, albatross taxonomy was pretty vexed and not fully agreed upon. The old treatment is, as you see here on the right-hand side. I was desperate to write my first book, and I had already got the title. The title is the hardest thing. If you've got a good title, you can write the book. It's the title that normally stops you. And you've all heard of a baker's dozen, 13. And so I had it, the title of the book, A Baker's Dozen. And I was going to write a book on albatrosses, become rich and famous. I had all these wonderful ideas. Well, it didn't quite work that way, because no sooner had I started to look into writing a book on albatrosses, I realized that that wasn't going to work, because the French found another albatross and then there were 14. And so that scotched that idea. But nevertheless, when I came to writing my first book in 1983, many of you have shown me copies, the well-used copies here this evening, which is great, well done. But in terms of 1983 and the first book I published, in that book, I had looked at the 13 species of albatross that had been suggested. Nothing made any sense. there were far more different species out there. And so from something like 13, I ended up with 18 species of albatross when I printed and published my first book in 1983. Fast forward to 2021, this is the new book, and many of you have brought copies for signatures. We do have some to sign. Thank you for the plug. If you would like a signature out there and a book, please do that on the way out tonight. And in this book, 2021, looking at the albatrosses again, the current status of albatross right at this moment, we have something like 22 different species. So the new way to treat the albatrosses, we have 6 large or great albatrosses. The top 3, Wandering Antipodean and Tristan and Amsterdam, are actually all members of the Wandering Albatross group. And the 2 royals down at the bottom are a split. So from 2 species in the old days, we've now got something like 6 or 8 species of big or great albatrosses. For those of you that have been with me down to the southern hemisphere, places like South Georgia and so forth, we had around about 7 or 8 of the smaller albatrosses, mollymawks as we call them. We'll come to that in a moment. And these birds now, we have something like 10 different species. We took the shy albatross group and turned them into 4 species. We took the 2 black-browed, the black-browed and Campbell, made those 2 different species. And we took the Indian and Atlantic yellow-nose, and these then became also new species for us. So you can see we went through these one after the other, and this made a lot more sense. For those of you that have been to the south with me, you'll know that the sooty albatrosses are the smallest albatross in the world. Those haven't changed, and we've still got 2 species. And so we have light-mantled and we have sooty albatross. For those of you sitting closely, or maybe even in the back, look at the bills of these 2 birds and you'll see that there's a white line. When you're close and it's not exposed, those stripes on the bill, called a sulcus, are yellow in the sooty albatross, blue in the light-mantled sooty albatross. Now, if you're not a birder and you're a bit in training, you know, a birder in training, I don't know if you know that, but there's some of you out there that are Nemes, and that's not even mildly interested in birds. And some of you are bits, which are birders in training. And some of you are combat birders, and my God, I hope you're not married to a combat birder. I can't think of anything worse. I've been working on my wife Shirley to become a birder, but she's refused to budge. I haven't actually succeeded there. But if you're not a true birder, you'll probably tick off your first real albatross species when you visit somewhere like the Galapagos Islands. And in the Galapagos Islands, we have the world's only truly tropical albatross. And look at the display. All albatrosses have wonderful displays, absolutely hilarious displays. They're all extroverts. They're all grand opera singers when it comes to trying to get a female. Okay, so with these, the North Pacific albatrosses, we have 4 species. So with the Phobastria, look at the waved albatross, that's down in the Galapagos Islands. And then you get the Laysan, the black-footed, and the short-tailed. For those of you that are birders here in America, this is a bird that should interest you. For those of you that go fishing out at Nia Bay, I see albatrosses every time I go out there during July and August. And a mixture of Laysan albatross. This is one of the more numerous albatrosses in the world. 700,000 pairs nest out in the North Pacific, normally around Hawaii and the Japanese islands. We have the black-footed albatross. This is the common one out at Nia Bay, and I can see up to a dozen of these on a July or August day. And then a very rare one, and that is then the short-tailed or Steller's albatross. And this bird was once declared extinct back in the 1950s. And there's nothing like declaring something to be extinct and somebody will now go and find it again. It's really embarrassing. So I try not to say birds are extinct, but next month, out of the world's 435 bird species, seabird species, I have seen every single one except one, and that's the Chinese crested tern. It was once declared to be extinct, but now it's been found again. And there are 5 left in the world. And I hope next month to have seen now all birds and get out to Taiwan and get the Chinese crested tern. So Chinese crested tern once declared extinct. This bird also once declared extinct and lives on the Japanese volcano islands. So those four, the North Pacific albatrosses, are found only in the North Pacific. The one in Galapagos, the waved, and then for the rest of these albatrosses, they are found only in the southern hemisphere, in an ocean that we call the Southern Ocean, and it's the largest body of water in the world, and it's about 20 times the size of the continental United States. These seas are amazingly rough. I've crossed the Drake Passage, as I say, over 200 times, and sometimes it's the Drake Lake. Some people then get very upset that they missed the rough seas, but I can assure you the rough seas of the Drake Passage really are quite something. These were the areas that the early mariners called the Roaring Forties. The Roaring Forties, the Screaming 60s, the Furious 50s. And the wave size of the waves out here are really quite something. That bird is 11 feet across. Look at that wave, a 40-foot high wave. And to survive in these areas, these birds have got to be not only master mariners and navigators, but also the consummate masters of aerodynamics. These birds live in some of the roughest seas that we have in the whole world. The largest of them all is the wandering albatross, the bird on the banner as you came in. As I mentioned, about 11 feet, sometimes in excess of 12.5 feet. They weigh around about 25 pounds or so in weight. These birds need lots of wind to keep them airborne and are found only in the southern hemisphere. A close second is the royal albatross from New Zealand, and this bird is just a few inches shorter and a few inches less on the wingspan. But the wandering and the royal are the two largest species of albatross. We call these the great albatrosses because they are big, and also the white-backed albatrosses is another term that we often use for them. And so the wandering and the royal are white-backed or great albatrosses. And then you have the smaller albatrosses, such as the black-browed. The black-browed albatross, if you look at it, it's got all black upper wings. I think you can see all that, all the black here, around here. And these birds are the most numerous albatross in the world. This will give you an idea about the albatrosses. The black-browed has a population of about 800,000, and they breed mostly on the Falkland Islands. They're distributed around the world, and so this is the most frequently met with albatross. Look at that colony behind. But all those little white dots were albatrosses that were nesting. That colony was a colony about 3,000 or so strong. A feature with all albatrosses, and we'll come into this a little bit later in the talk, is that these birds have only one egg at each breeding attempt. So that's a feature of the tube-nosed birds, and we'll come into that when we get into the breeding a little bit later on. They're easily towed with the combination of the yellow bill and the white head, and the name, of course, comes from that dark eyebrow that you can see running through the eye and then ending in a pointed V behind the eye. So this is the black-browed albatross. It has a cousin, which is the gray-headed albatross, slightly rarer, 84,000 pairs, half of which nest at South Georgia. How many of you here have been to South Georgia? Yes, with great days, weren't they, Don? Yes, they certainly were. Yeah, the best days, yep. And so these are gray-headed albatrosses, and they really sit around like pieces of hand-painted fine French porcelain. Look at that bill, look at the color, look at the white mascara behind the eye, look at the dark eyebrow. Ladies, you'd probably be jealous of a makeup job like that. This is absolutely stunning. And one of the great things, I'll be in South Georgia later this year, and one of the great things is that I never ever miss climbing to the greyheads when we get to places like South Georgia. As I said, they resemble pieces of fine hand-painted French porcelain. And to go to South Georgia is really to go to the home of the albatross. We have no less than 4 species breeding there, and many of them still in good numbers at South Georgia, particularly as we have eradicated rats from that island. Yes. Took us 5 years. Took us 5 years, over 500 tons of rodenticide, but we got every last rat. The only good rat is a dead rat. If you want my real opinion, ask me sometime over a pint of beer. Anyway, so let's ask ourselves, what makes an albatross an albatross? How can we be sure that we're looking at an albatross? Well, albatrosses have several points that are only found on albatrosses. And for many of you that are bird watchers and beginning birders, bits in training, we will often hear you say, well, they're black and white. And many of you will look at the patterns and the colors of birds and use that as your identification tool. As you get further along into birding, you tend to look at structure. And if you look at the structure of a gull and that of an albatross, the structures are very different, even though the pattern, the blacks, the whites, are the same. Some of these birds will have yellow bills with a red tip, and that's the same with an albatross. The black-browed are very similar, but what is different is the structure, and that is particularly true with the heads. If you look at a gull's bill, the top mandible that you see here, this is all one plate, and the lower mandible is also one plate. And I can stand behind this opening here, and I can wave at you through this little opening. If you look at albatross's bill, very, very different. Look at the fusion marks on the bill. And an albatross's bill, it's hook-tipped to start with, but there's no external openings. And if you look carefully at that bill, you'll see that there are lots and lots of fusion lines. And the average albatross bill is made up of 7 different parts. So these birds have fused bills. Does that mean that any bird with a fused bill is an albatross? Is this one an albatross? No. It would certainly like to be. It's got fusion lines on its bill, but it lacks the one thing that albatrosses have, and that's a set of nostrils placed on the side of the bill. And you have one nostril on the right-hand side, and you have one nostril on the left-hand side. And believe it or not, that's a very unique thing. And all albatrosses you saw before the wandering, this is a black-browed, this is going to be a Buller's albatross. If you look carefully, the nostrils are parted, and one placed on the left, one placed on the right. That makes them very, very different than any other birds in the world. For those of you that have been with me down to the subantarctic islands, you'll know that the giant petrels, the bird over here on your left, giant petrels and albatrosses are in the Procellariformes, in the tube-nosed birds, but the albatross has divided nostrils, one on the left, one on the right. If you look at the tube noses of a giant petrel, very, very different. The nostrils are encased in a single tube, and they're placed on the top of the bird's bill. They are not divided. There are over 130 species of petrels or Procellariforme type birds in the world, and all of them, apart from the albatrosses, have this arrangement where the nostrils are combined and placed on a tube. And so for an albatross, to describe an albatross, quite easy to do. And that's a bird simply with divided nostrils. Out of 11,000 species of birds in the world, there are only 22 that have divided nostrils. So you can easily become an expert on albatrosses. An albatross is a bird that has divided nostrils. All albatrosses are petrels. Not all petrels are albatrosses. Just remember that. Like the albatrosses, the other petrels have similar breeding habits and characteristics, and that includes the breeding. I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture that these birds only lay one egg at a time. So it doesn't matter whether you're a storm petrel, a bird that can fit into the palm of your hand, or whether you're an albatross, a bird that you would not try to fit on the palm of your hand. If you're a petrel, you only ever lay one egg at a time, and most of them lay just one egg a year. The big albatrosses, the wanderers, the royals, etc., they lay one egg at a time, but they breed only every second year because their breeding regime is so long. After breeding, they go back out to the habitat, the open ocean, over which they feed on. And you almost never see albatrosses feed, unless you're feeding offal or something from the back of a fishing boat. But apart from that, they are feeders mostly at nighttime and when they feed on squid. You know, I'm a committed albatross lover, and it sometimes hurts me to say this, but they're pretty dumb. When it comes to feeding, they have no stealth or any real ways of finding food other than looking at it from the air. And when they are flying along like this, they're on the lookout. If you can imagine taking your car and driving along the road and living on roadkill, I know some people that do. Yes, I do. But if you're going to live on roadkill, this is what the albatross does. And the albatross flies looking always down, and they'll cover 600 miles in a single day. So if you fly 600 miles in a single day, you'll normally get at least a little bit of roadkill. So once they see a dead squid or something like that, they come in, they circle, undercarriage down, and here they come. And breaking to a halt, and a big splash, and then all they do is they circle around up to their prey. I said the albatrosses are dumb. They are, but their prey items are dumber. Squid are dumber than albatross. And as long as that status quo stands, you've got albatrosses that will be able to feed. And these birds feed on sometimes huge, huge squid. You can see that squid there. That albatross, the bill is 7 inches long. Some of these squid that the albatross take are 4 feet, 5 feet long. And they can't break that up. And they get hold of them, and they've got huge gapes. If you look here, see the bill ends, and this gape goes all the way past the eye. The whole head opens up. These things are like a big commercial vacuum cleaner. They simply club the birds with their big bills. They get hold of that prey item, the squid, and they swallow it whole. I've sometimes had albatrosses that we've been feeding, and I have a bucket of squid, and I'll go to a youngster and I'll hold the squid up 2 and 3 feet long, and I'll just hold it like this. They'll open the bill, and you just drop it in, and it's gone down. So these birds, they can take very, very big squid, and once they've finished, off they go. The smaller albatrosses seem to take the smaller squid, as you would expect, and the bigger ones, the larger squid. And so this is a Buller's albatross for those of you interested, and that's northern Buller's albatross off the coast of New Zealand. Oh, that's the runoff. Somebody asked me, how do they take off? Well, there you go. They face the wind and they run. Their feet are huge. When you leave tonight, go to that poster that we put out on the banner and take your hand and put your hand where the foot is of the albatross. Nobody here will have a bigger hand than the albatross feet. And they have very, very strong legs and feet. And in the old days of the whalers and sealers, they used to take the webs from the foot and sew them together, and they made great tobacco pouches. This is what they used to use the albatrosses for. They didn't waste anything. So these birds, they run across the surface of the sea, and off they go. One of the great things about albatrosses is their longevity. These birds are long-lived. There are no birds in the world that live longer than an albatross. It just doesn't work. And we keep getting albatrosses now that are older and older than the ones before. Back in the 1980s and 90s, the oldest known albatross was Grandma. Grandma was an albatross from Taiora Heads in New Zealand, and she was banded in 1937, and she lived for 69 years. She went through 13 husbands. She had a problem with guys. And in albatrosses, good men are hard to find. Probably in our society as well. But you have to be a very loud-voiced albatross to grab your females. And Grandma was certainly that. She was very, very particular who she would go with. And so she, as I say, had 13 to 14 husbands. She disappeared in 1989. These days, we have another albatross called Wisdom. And Wisdom is a Laysan albatross. She lives at Midway Island. She was banded as an adult bird at least 10 years old in 1956.
And so that would put her back to 1946, and that's just perfect because that's my age as well. And so I'm 78 years of age, and wisdom is also 78 years of age. And as we sit here tonight, you're looking around, I can tell you that wisdom is an amazing bird. Right now, she's sitting on top and she's brooding her 38th chick. And it hatched out 5 weeks ago. And there's a little, you go in and just put wisdom albatross, and you can pick up her comings and goings. And so she's 48 years of age. So quite remarkable. And that normally brings me to one thing that people come to me afterwards and say, you know, you talked about wisdom, 78 years of age. Do they? And I say, you're thinking of that M word, aren't you? And they say, well, yes, what about menopause? It doesn't happen in birds. And albatrosses are actually more fertile the older they get. And so, because they've got all that experience behind them. Another big thing about our albatrosses are the power of flight. As I say, there's nothing that lives longer than an albatross, and when it comes to power of flight, nothing travels further than an albatross. Albatrosses, we've put transponders on them and click and check them across the world. And the champion one so far is a northern royal albatross in a single day through a little over 1,100 miles. And then you have something like a gray-headed albatross from South Georgia, transponder on that bird, actually circumnavigated the globe in the Southern Ocean in 42 days. You take a wandering albatross, a goonie, taking off for the very first time, going to sea. Within the first 8 weeks, it will have done 8 to 9, 10,000 miles. And then by the time they come back as adults ready to breed, that would be 8 to 9 years. They'll have flown almost 2 million miles. In their very first year at sea, they fly 185,000 miles. We've done this with transponders, with data loggers and so forth. So these birds are very, very foraging. In a single feeding trip, most of the wandering albatrosses will fly between 8 and 15,000 miles. And in a lifetime, an average lifetime for a wandering albatross, they'll fly something like, 15, 16, 17 million miles. They do round trips to the moon and back all the time. So these are the longest lived and the longest flying birds in the world today. In terms of size, I've been mentioning the banner outside. And in terms of size, really go and have a look at that banner because it will give you an idea. But of course, most people just don't really have much clue on size because at sea, there's no cars out there, there's no people walking around. You can't actually measure anything. And the only real way at sea to really appreciate the full enormity of a wandering albatross is to pick one up. And only then do you get some idea of the scale of these birds. These birds are immense, folks. You think of a turkey, 20, 25 pounds in weight. These got wings longer than any turkey that you'll see. Wings some 5 or 6 feet long on either side. So I'm often asked, do I have a favorite bird? Yes, I do have a favorite bird. In fact, in this photograph, there are 3 of my favorite things in life. On the left-hand side, I've got a light-mantled sooty albatross, definitely my favorite bird. I've got my Canon camera, I wouldn't do without it. And Shirley, my wife, on the right. And Shirley, if you are in the audience, not in that order, my darling. So this would be about full size of the light-mantled sooty albatross. Notice the blue stripe on the bill. And one of the great wonders, one of the great privileges I get each year is to be able to go to South Georgia and to walk up, climb up to the cliffs where these birds nest. They are very, very small for an albatross, the smallest of them all, around about 6 or so feet. And that's the shot that everybody wants. I don't know if you can make that out, but we've got the eye, we've got the white orb, these are Phoebetria, and we have in the eye itself, we have the silhouette, the vision of 2 people taking a photograph of the bird. If you are an albatross fanatic, that's your #1 shot on a South Georgia trip. This gives you some idea of the beauty of these birds, the blue line, the solstice on the bill, and that white crescent. Remember, Phoebe was the moon goddess, and so these are
the beautiful birds, and found mostly in the more southerly islands of the Southern Ocean. As I say, they're cliff nesters, and that means that they can take over areas where other albatrosses cannot. And when they want to just fly, they simply go out to the edge of the cliff, they push themselves off, they open their wings, and they let gravity do the rest. And here they are flying around. They are absolutely one of the most gorgeous birds in the world, and without a doubt, my favorite of the birds. The highlight of any South Georgia trip to me is to climb the cliffs of South Georgia and just sit down and let these birds fly up and down in front of you. They are beautiful birds. They actually mate, and, well, not actually mate, but they actually woo each other, court each other by these wonderful choreographed flights that they have, where they do rub and touch wings together in mid-flight. They are absolutely spectacular to look at. And they come, they land, the male has got its back to you, and then they do these wonderful curtsies, and they toss the bills upwards, and they do this, pew! Pew! And the males with the longest and harshest voice are the ones that normally get the females, and the females will come to the ledges, and courting continues at the ledges. I remember one morning when I first went down to South Georgia, it must be about 30, 40 years ago, we were looking at visiting a king penguin colony, and many people had never visited a king penguin colony, and so we wanted to make a bit of an impression on them. And so we promised them that we would take them to one of the smaller colonies. And what we did was actually take them to the largest colony on South Georgia, just to prove our point. And so we spent the morning looking at king penguins. There's an egg under that big tuft of skin there. There's an egg there. There's an egg there. And this is how they incubate. King penguins don't make nests. They go walk about with their eggs. So they're really quite something. They stand a little bit over 3 feet in height. And we took them, as I say, we said to them at one of the smaller colonies, but we said, but you expect a little bit of wall-to-wall. And so we took them on the beach, and we showed them wall-to-wall king penguins. We get paid for doing this. It's one of the craziest jobs I've ever had in my life. I do it for nothing. In fact, I am doing it for nothing. But, you know, this wall-to-wall penguin, and, you know, we often use expressions like the penguin stretched for as far as the eye could see. And, you know, in South Georgia, that's actually the case. Can you see all the way down through here? These are all king penguins, all through here, all down here, all down here, all across here, and all the way down. I was once sitting next to a very good friend of mine, and it was raining, and we were waiting for the rain to stop, and the rain did stop, and then the sun came out in a great big golden orb. And my good friend, Frank Todd, just looked at me, and with one sweep of his arm, he said, "Peter, my friend," he said, "if God ever takes a holiday, he takes it here at South Georgia." And Frank was right. Absolutely unbelievable. We spent the morning photographing king penguins, National Geographic style. It was absolutely amazing. We were about to go home for lunch, and I heard the call above me, and there was the call of the Light Mantle City Albatross. And I said to my expedition leader, "Can I stay for lunch?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll pick you up after lunch, an hour and a half." And so with that, I took my sketch pad, rucksack, etc., and then went up the mountainside and sat down next to this particular male. And I spent my whole lunch hour sitting next to this bird and drawing and sketching it. And I can tell you that was 42 years ago, and still rates as my best lunch hour of my life. Okay, now I'd like you to become albatrosses. We've done quite a bit of the biology and so forth, but let's trace the history of one of these birds. I want you to imagine that you've been a wandering albatross. You've been sitting on a headland during the depths of winter. There's been lots of snow falling, and 2 big white birds have been coming in and feeding you all winter long. When spring arrived, they stopped coming, and so therefore you were left sitting forlornly on a beach, having been fed all of the winter long. and nothing more came. You were deserted. And one of the things with tube-nosed birds, Procellariformes, is that they all desert their youngsters. You'd think that having put in 278 days in a nest, incubation of 76 to 84 days, that as an adult you'd want to know whether your chick survived. They don't. The adults stop feeding, they reject the bird, they go to sea, the youngster takes its final few flaps, goes down to the edge of a cliff and throws itself off, and then begins one of the most amazing survival stories in the world of natural history. These birds fly out to sea unaided, unguided, and they will remain at sea for something like 7 to 8 years. As I mentioned, they will fly 600 to 700 miles in a single day, and nothing flies further. So these birds then go to sea, and when they go to sea, they are Goonies. They have this white clown face that they're so renowned for, dark underbody to start with, but that actually will come lighter. They head out towards the open sea, and they're looking for areas of upwellings, because this is where they learn what the ocean is all about. Remember, they circumnavigate the Earth in 54 days, or they can do if they want to. So they take their position with the other seabirds, and they feed, and they get to know where all of these upwellings are, where the fishing grounds are, and this is going to be very important for them when they become adults themselves. So here's our Goonie, and it will now get its white belly, and it will spend something like 8 years or so flying around and around the world. Wandering albatross is the fastest it's ever been, is 54 days of age. Remember that gray-headed albatross flew around the world in 42 days. So as these birds get older, they now get whiter and whiter. And this would be a female type. Look at the dark tail, look at the grubby plumage. Males tend to be a bit whiter and a bit cleaner, and this would be a male. Can you imagine you've been out at sea for 8 to 9 years, you've never touched ground, you never go back to land, you spend the whole of your 8 to 9 years flying up to 2 million miles every year, around and around and around. And then suddenly that terrible thing called hormones kicks in, and you want to head home because you need to procreate. You've spent your time at sea, you've survived the most savage ocean in the world, the Southern Ocean. And you get up to your islands and you look down and there's people down there. Of course, I mean albatross people. You put your undercarriage down and here you come, folks. As I say, you've landed on the water, but you've never ever landed on ground. I'm telling you, it hurts me to say this, but I've seen some birds hit the ground and do 3 somersaults going past me. This hurts as an albatross aficionado, Rio, but I can tell you, it's not a pretty sight. It's not a pretty sight. We often have a saying, those of us that are into albatrosses, any landing an albatross walks away from is a good one. So I'm giving you the story from the male's point of view. The male here on the right-hand side, look how much bigger it is, whiter in the wing. Look how dark the wings are here. This is a young male. This is an older male. This male would be probably about 50 years of age. It's got an all-white tail. This one's got black in the tail. This one's about a 20 to 30-year-old. And this is a female, slightly smaller and grubbier. And just when you're wondering what to do, an extrovert male on the right-hand side of you puts its wings out, puts its head between its toes, and then starts to let fly with this wonderful salvo that they've got. And it really does sound like a horse neighing. And the louder you are, the more females you get. And that disturbs me because I'm just a wimpy old Englishman and I don't have a very good voice. But for some of you that are big, hairy lumberjacks out there, you will do well at the albatross colony. I can assure you, you really will. And so this is what we call the ecstatic sky point. And they signal by the upward stretch of the head and neck and that very wild, horse-like call that they have. When you look at them, you then decide to yourself, well, what are they doing? This is the debutante's ball. This is the singles bar. And this is called a gam. This is a meeting of albatrosses on the shore. And the one purpose that they've got is to try to find a mate or a partner. The noise often attracts other albatrosses, wanders in, and you sometimes get 20 to 30 of these birds. Folks, can you imagine what I'm saying here? You have 20 to 30 birds, 11 to 12 feet across, all calling like the wild horses, all with their wings out, some touching the sky with their bills, some with their bills open and kissing each other, which we'll come into in a moment. And this is one of the greatest bird displays that the world ever puts on. And this is all the albatrosses do it, but the wandering probably has the most bizarre of all. I've taken quite a few famous people up to watch the albatrosses with their mating calls. Perhaps one of the most famous I ever had was Mr. Jimmy Stewart, the film actor. And when Jimmy, Mr. Stewart, as I called him, as Mr. Stewart, when he got down to South Georgia, he was so frail. He was, barely 100 pounds in weight, 90 pounds in weight, very, very frail. But he wanted to see the albatrosses. He had asked for it. So 3 of us carried him up the island, and we put him down on a big tuft of grass, poa grass, and he sat there, and they were displaying right in front of him. And he turned around and he said, "Come back in 20 minutes, please." And so we went away and we came back in 20 minutes. And as we came up to Jimmy Stewart, he was sitting on his grass poa pedestal. And as we came up, we could see that there were tears running down his face. And he looked at me and he reached out with a hand. And he said, "Peter, my friend," he said, "Hollywood never put on a show like this." And I got to think he was right. So that was Jimmy Stewart's appraisal of our wandering albatrosses. In these meetings, you have to learn how to dance like an albatross, which is a one-footed sway walk, backwards and forwards. That I got good at. They learn how to kiss like an albatross, and this is going to be necessary for them. And at first, they start in groups, and then as the weeks turn to, or days turn to weeks, you can look across the island, and then all these that you see in pairs are young birds that are taking up mates for the first time. The single birds that you see here are birds that have already been experienced birds. They came in early, and they're already sitting on a single egg. So you know where your birds are. So having just chosen a partner, you now choose a place to actually go and make a nest. And that's a very important site for you, because it has to be in a very windy condition. You and I would choose sheltered spots, not the albatrosses. They need 25 to 30 knots wind. Remember, they are 11 or 12 feet across. They weigh 20 to 25 pounds in weight. So they need windy conditions. The male does the choosing of the nest site because he's the biggest and the heaviest, so it must work for him. It will work for his female. And these birds then start to trample the area around the nest flat, and they then start to make their nest. The females, they're sitting now on the nest. You see her darker wings, and she then starts to form the nest mound. This takes about 2 to 3 years, and it's called the engagement years, and then the male and the female set off. They probably don't recognize each other at sea, but they do at the nest, because only 2 birds know where that nest is, and they maintain their pair fidelity through their site fidelity. I know plenty of people like that too, by the way. Think about that. Okay, so the male and female take off, and then the male comes back 11 months later, and he arrives on the nest. And you can see the nest is still there from last year, and they don't lay eggs in the nest to start with, so they have 2 to 3 years of just engagement. And then he sits and he waits for his female. And he looks and looks and looks. As a general rule, the female comes in about 7 to 10 days after the female. Gentlemen of the audience, if you have not seen your female for something like 10 or 11 months, and you're standing on the nest for 10 days waiting, and then you look out, and then here she comes. You recognize her immediately. How would you greet her? You'd greet her like any self-respecting male would greet. And you turn, you put your wings out, you do a sky point, and you shout at the top of your voice, "Welcome home, baby." And some things never change. The female walks up, the male has got his wings spread out, and it's like me. If I go away for a few days lecturing and I come back home, if I walked in the kitchen and Shirley was there, I have to go and give her a little squeeze and a cuddle and a kiss, and that's exactly what the albatrosses do. I hate to anthropomorphize, but they kiss like an albatross, and now starts an incredibly, very, very busy period. And this busy period is one of the great spectacles of the bird world. They have 5 weeks of heavy displaying, backwards and forwards, making that nest. And that nest will sometimes be something like 12 or 18 inches from the ground. There you go, big mound. Only one egg is going to go into it. That's the male. Look how white the bird is. That's the male doing that. And this leads up to the one thing that they are waiting for, and that, of course, is copulation. Copulation lasts about 40 seconds, and remember, it's once every 2 years. Yeah, not much fun being an albatross. So here they are, and that 40 seconds worth of fun gives them an egg, and it's a very large egg, not the largest egg in the world. That's, of course, to the ostrich of the world. But this is an egg 6 inches by 4 inches. And as you would expect from the monarch of the bird world, these birds have the longest incubation of any bird in the world. So 76 to 84 days. The brown kiwi is close, but not quite close enough. So this bird, they sit on the egg, and they have incubation duties that they swap backwards and forwards. But if you're going to have an 84-day incubation period, you want not a room with a view, but a nest with a view. And if you look at this is Bay of Isles, and this glacier here, this glacier is the Grace Glacier. Some of you in the room would have heard of Robert Cushman Murphy. He was my one and only true hero, apart from Shackleton, that came down to these places. And he would write to his wife. He was a typical biologist. He got married and jumped in the carriage from his marriage, did not go home and do anything. He jumped in a carriage and went down and jumped on the brig Daisy, and then went down to the Southern Ocean for 3 years of his life. Everywhere he went, he would write letters to his wife, Grace. And in the end, he put those into a book. And for those of you that like a good read, Logbook for Grace is absolutely wonderful. But when he got to Montevideo, he was sailing south from Montevideo. And as he left Montevideo and the South American headlands, he looked up and he saw his first albatross. And he wrote to his wife, Grace, I have now joined a higher cult of mortals, for I have seen the albatross. It's a beautiful book. Read it if you have the time. Incubation stretches from 2 to 10 days. Normally 8 to 10 is about right. And sometimes they can lose quite a bit of weight. As the incubation gets nearer and nearer to hatching, the birds get very, very excited. Okay, you'll see them on the nest turning the eggs backwards and forwards. And I wondered when I was first a researcher down there, well, why are they so excited? And I went and I was measuring the egg and taking the eggs' weight, etc., daily. And then I suddenly realized what all the fuss was about. The egg was about to hatch within 4 days of hatching, and I picked up the egg, and I could feel the vibrations in the egg, and I could hear the chick calling, beep, 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 beep. Having sat on an egg for nearly 3 months, almost 90 days, here they have a talking egg. No wonder they're so excited. What we have to do as researchers is wait, and what we do is we look towards the underside of the bird. And if you look carefully here, you can see just a little bill or something peeking out. If you get down on your hands and knees and you creech, you'll see Master Albert Ross, our young albatross, is taking the first peek at South Georgia. And that peak, you can see the beach is still in wintertime crammed with penguins, thousands upon thousands. And of course, South Georgia itself is a beautiful place. You've got tumbling glaciers coming down to the sea. You've got 90% of all of the fur seals in the world. You've got half of the elephant seals in the world. And out over past all that, you've got the open ocean over which one day our young albatross will be flying. There's a guard period of about 4 to 5 weeks where one of the adults is always at the chick and the nest site. And then notice that the bird has got its mouth open, it's very hungry, it's always begging for food. They've got very, very big diets. They take 4 or 5 pounds at each sitting. And you know, notice that it's by regurgitation. And I think you all know that many birds have an upper chamber of the stomach called the ventriculus. That takes in all of the food and is partly digested, turns into very rich lipid oils and so forth. Now, that's one way of doing it.
There are other birds like the puffins who use their bills as shopping baskets. And you know, I don't know if you know this, there are competitions every year between the Canadians and the Brits to see which puffin has the most fish. They obviously haven't got anything better to do. But the most fish in the bill on most years is around 47. And that allows the puffin to have a feeding range of, say, 50 kilometers. But once your shopping basket is full, once your bill is full of fish, you have to return home. When an albatross leaves its chick, it doesn't just fly for 50 or so miles, 50 kilometers or more. What it does is it leaves its chick and then flies out to the open ocean. We were interested in where these go at South Georgia for a long while. We put transponders on them, and it turns out that almost every single albatross that we traveled flew between 8 and 15,000 kilometers, and most of them were feeding off the coast of Brazil. So that gives you some idea of how far these birds actually fly. They join with other birds at these big gatherings, and these gatherings will often then be around commercial fishing. And this is where a lot of our albatrosses and other seabirds, by the way, meet an untimely end. And they get impaled on hooks. And this is when they're baiting the fish and so forth and going down. We're losing still tens of thousands of albatrosses each and every year. And I would just add that when that happens, we don't lose just one albatross, we lose two. Because back on shore, that chick needs two adults to feed it. Its demand for food is so much that one adult cannot possibly feed a single chick. And so therefore you lose one of the adults on a hook, and then you lose the chick as well. So a big thing here. I can't imagine an ocean without albatrosses. It would be like life without laughter. And we do face, out of the 22 species of albatross now, folks, we have 17 that are facing certainly some extirpation, local extinctions on some of their islands. But assuming that our chick does survive and both the adults are feeding it, the snows of winter come in and the birds are still fed by the adults and feeding backwards and forwards. They're fed about every 8 or 9 days. And you know, when I did research on albatrosses, it was the romantic age. It was an age where you didn't need much. These days there's too many damn computers and I can never turn them on, or I lose things and it says press here and it says delete all. And I press the wrong thing. I mean, I'm not very good on these sort of machines. My era was the era when it was much more simple. You just had a set of kitchen scales. You had a set of kitchen scales. You just waited until the adult was walking up. You weighed the chick. You let them feed, and then weighed the chick, and you knew exactly how much food there had been. So I was in the old era, but and loved every moment of it. These are times when the blizzards blow, and chicks are sometimes buried under 2 or 3 feet of snow, or their nest is at least. And so these young birds look like French poodles with bills. And they're all stomach, and a bird like that would be almost halfway grown, and it would have about another 2 months or so to go until it fledges. Yeah, as I say, like a French poodle with a bill. And it's about this time that the birds start to really flap and flap and flap. And they exercise those huge wings of theirs before they can make their first flight. Now, I would like to say, as an albatross man, that our albatross chicks, as they were about to fledge, were as cute and as cuddly as the penguin chicks to the south. But I can't lie, this hurts. But the goonie is about the most ugliest damn thing you've ever seen. It can hardly walk. It's got all brown plumage. It's got a white clown-like face. And I'm telling you, the adults come up and they take one look. What the hell have we created here? They get one last feed. And that last feed is the last that they'll see of their adults. The adults walk to the headland, and as I mentioned earlier, they fling themselves off the headland. And they fly out to the ocean, never knowing whether their chick will make it or not. It's one of the strange things in seabird biology. This happens in all the tube noses. Our young albatross is left forlornly waiting and hoping that
free meals will resume, but it doesn't. They exercise and exercise, and they get ready for their first flight off the island. They'll get one chance at making it without injury, and then they'll be starting a big survival story. And you know, one of the big things about my life is that I do some things that I really love, and one of those things is to share with people like yourself some of the great wonders of natural history that we have on the face of our planet today, and that is visiting these remote areas where wildlife is so precious and so extreme. I remember one meeting we had a small group of people, about 9 of us, and we were photographing this particular gam going on. The sun was going down, everything was bathed in yellow. It was absolutely magical, and every eye had a highlight. It was just a photographer's dream. And as we were watching this and photographing, one of my group turned around and he said, "What's that?" And he pointed to this goonie that was walking out of the tussock grass. And I was absolutely flabbergasted at this. I couldn't just... I said to him, I said, "It's a goonie, but it's 6 weeks too late. This bird should have left 6 weeks ago." And with that, the goonie walked across the grass and got to a headland, a small headland, grass headland. I'd been to Antarctica over 200 times. So I'd never, ever been able to show anybody the first flight of an albatross. And here was this bird. It was late. It was ready to go. And I said to my people, I said, "Quick, quick, run." And so we ran, came down here underneath the albatross, and here we were waiting. The wind had been getting up all afternoon, and so the big gust followed another big gust and another big gust. And I turned to the people and said, "Put your camera on fast forward," I said, "and just get ready and pray that your little Japanese man inside that camera is ready for this." And with that, folks, there was a big gust of wind, and the bird launched itself off and went straight over our heads. The people on the left of us, there were 2 people that were a bit slower, and they almost got knocked flat by the albatross. There were only 9 of us on that particular walk, but I can tell you that we let out a cheer that you could have heard in Alaska. And we watched in awed silence as the bird made it out over the open ocean, but it was going the wrong way. It was heading west, and it should have been heading east. And I said, "No, no, east, go east." God strike me dead. The bird turned to the east. And I said, "Yes." I said, "Your next fall is the coast of Africa." And that was the beginning of one of the great survival stories in the world of natural history. I want you to imagine this bird had never flown before. This bird had never been out to the ocean. Here it is flying across the open ocean, as often as not, as just a mere speck of life, and set against a sea that is savage, a sea where survival is not given. Only the strongest will survive. And it will spend the next 8 years flying around the world, time after time after time. By the time it turns to head back for land, it will have flown some 2 million miles, and it will not return as a goonie, but as Diomede exulans, the great sea warrior. Well, I guess I've blown my cover. I've been in love with albatrosses since I saw my first one. My mind is filled with wonder, with awe. I still see them with the eyes of a child. After all, these aren't just simple birds. These are albatrosses, birds that fly and follow ships without so much of a beat of their wings, birds that have crazy breeding antics. These are the ocean nomads of our misnamed world, planet Earth. Thank you so much.